Hello everyone and welcome to my new video. Today we are exploring a real-world ethical and legal dilemma that sits at the intersection of environmental protection, economic survival, and corporate responsibility. This case focuses on offshore oil exploration along Tanzania's coastline. On one side, the Tanzanian government seeks economic development. On another side, a US-based petroleum company operates illegally under existing regulations. And on the third side, environmental advocacy groups warn of irreversible ecological damage and community harm. As an arbitrator, the challenge is not about choosing winners and losers. It's about creating a balanced, defensible resolution that respects economic needs, legal obligations, and moral responsibilities. Throughout this video, we will analyze competing stakeholder interests, evaluate ethical tensions, and explore realistic pathways towards sustainable compromise. Let's begin with the context. Tanzania has authorized offshore oil exploration in its territorial waters. This activity promises substantial economic returns that could fund healthcare, infrastructure, and poverty reduction initiatives. However, fishing communities along the coast report pollution concerns that threaten marine biodiversity and local livelihoods. These waters are not only economically valuable, they are culturally and socially essential. Meanwhile, environmental organizations argue that continued fossil fuel investment delays global climate goals and creates a long-term ecological risk. So, this dispute is not only environmental, it's economic, it's social, and it's geopolitical. This complexity is what makes arbitration necessary rather than simply legal enforcement. Now, let's examine Tanzania's position. From the government's perspective, offshore oil development represents a pathway out of economic hardship. As a developing nation, Tanzania faces urgent demands to provide food security, public health services, and infrastructure development. Sovereign states also have internationally recognized rights to manage their natural resources for national benefit. However, this position becomes ethically complicated when short-term revenue generation risks long-term environmental damage. If fishing ecosystems collapse, thousands of families lose income and future economic stability is threatened. So, while Tanzania's economic goals are valid, sustainability becomes the central concern. Next, let's analyze the petroleum company. Legally speaking, the company is operating within both Tanzanian regulatory frameworks and international business standards. From a corporate governance standpoint, compliance often defines legitimacy. The company's objectives are straightforward: protect shareholder investment, maintain profitability, and ensure regulatory certainty. However, ethical leadership requires more than legal compliance. When operations create environmental harm and disproportionate impacts on vulnerable populations, corporate responsibility extends beyond minimum standards. This is where law and ethics diverge. Something can be legal and still be morally insufficient. Now, let's look at the environmental organizations. These groups focus on protecting marine ecosystems and safeguarding fishing communities whose survival depends on clean waters. They also raise concerns about transboundary pollution affecting neighboring countries. Their moral argument is strong. Environmental stewardship is a global responsibility. However, their legal leverage is more limited. International environmental enforcement mechanisms are often fragmented and slow. While the ethical case is compelling, enforcement gaps create challenges in translating advocacy into binding outcomes. This highlights a major weakness in global environmental governance systems. So, where does common ground exist? First, all parties benefit from environmental stability. Without healthy ecosystems, economic development becomes unsustainable. Second, enhanced environmental monitoring allows oil exploration to continue while reducing risk. Third, community compensation programs help mitigate social harm by reinvesting profits into affected populations. Fourth, gradual transitions toward renewable energy offer long-term economic diversification. Finally, joint regional oversight builds trust and accountability across borders. Common ground is not about abandoning interests. It is about aligning incentives. Now let's move into actionable solutions. Independent environmental audits create transparency and accountability. These audits ensure pollution levels, safety compliance, and mitigation strategies remain verifiable. Investment in local conservation projects demonstrates corporate responsibility while protecting fisheries and tourism industries. A phased exploration approach limits environmental exposure while allowing economic benefits to flow gradually. Multilateral cooperation among East African nations improves ocean governance and reduces cross-border conflict. Together, these strategies move the dispute from confrontation toward cooperation. The heart of this dispute lies ethical leadership. Stakeholder theory reminds us that corporations and governments do not operate in isolation. Every decision affects communities, ecosystems, and future generations. Corporate social responsibility requires organizations to internalize environmental and social costs rather than externalizing harm. Transparency builds trust. Accountability ensures credibility. Sustainability protects long-term value. Ethical governance is not idealistic, it is strategic. Organizations that ignore ethics ultimately face reputational damage, regulatory backlash, and financial risk. Let's conclude. This case illustrates that environmental disputes are rarely black and white. Tanzania's economic needs are legitimate. The company's legal operations are defensible. Environmental protection is morally necessary. True arbitration success comes from integration, not domination. By combining economic development with environmental safeguards, transparent governance, and long-term sustainability planning, all parties can benefit. This balanced approach strengthens institutional trust, protects vulnerable communities, and promotes responsible global business practices. Ultimately, ethical leadership is not about choosing sides, it's about designing systems that allow progress without sacrifice. Thank you for watching. If you found this discussion helpful, please like, subscribe, and share. I look forward to continuing this conversation with you.